I've never seen them differentiate a time frame. At the time they apply for unemployment, if they're an employee, by the definition of the law, they're going to say, you owe all this money. I think you might have some legal arguments maybe to make to say, well, for the first 3 years they were really an independent contractor, but by they doing that, you're of course then admitting. So that's sort of a touchy situation. So, you know, a lot of companies do this. I see this all the time, and it's done as a way to save money, and most businesses don't know that the law does define it, and that this is a really big issue. So, you know, obviously we're in a down economy right now, so as you've all probably heard, the department, both the state and federal government are kind of lacking in revenue. So, really quick way to make up some of that revenue is to go after the companies that are doing this. Okay, so they're not real empathetic right now. They want their tax money. The workers' comp people want their money. Unemployment wants their money. So it's a really big headache if you have a misclassification problem. So people think that, well, that bites. Now I just have to have everybody be employees, and that's not what I want. Well, actually, there are a lot of advantages to having people classified as employees. And the big one is you have more control over them. You can set their hours. You can really define what their job duties are. You can evaluate them, you can discipline them. It's much easier to terminate them than it would be if they're a contractor. So there actually are a lot of benefits to classifying them as an employee. The only upside of the independent contractor arrangement is the financial savings. That is the only. But if it's not legitimate, it's not worth that financial savings because it will eventually get caught. The other way it gets caught is if either the independent contractor or the company's taxes get audited by the IRS is the other way that it gets discovered. But it's usually when they file for unemployment is the big one. So, again, if you don't comply with the law, you're looking at not only back overtime, unemployment insurance, workers' comp, state and federal taxes, fines, and penalties. It's a lot of money. So don't make this mistake. Make sure that you have a professional, like myself, somebody else, review that situation, make sure it's legitimate.
So what is the definition then of an independent contractor?
It's complicated. It's not something I can just spout off. And it's what we call in the law, we call it a weighted factor test. So there are about 15 factors that the courts look for, and some are weighted more heavily than others. That's why it's complicated. It's not easy to necessarily figure this out yourself. It's really best to have a legal professional help you with this decision. It's a little complicated. I mean, the biggest factor is that if the person is taking a lot of work direction from the company, they're probably an employee. So that's the hot button. That's the number one thing. That's the most important factor is how much work direction is the person taking from the company. Versus, if you hire somebody to do your website and you say, this is the information I want on it, go to it. I'm not going to tell you how. I'm not going to tell you, they're not taking work direction from you. That's an independent contractor. If you're seeing that person on a regular basis and you're telling them what to do and how to do it and giving them work direction as an employer would do, that's an employee. That's the easiest way I can explain it without a lot of legalese. But it is fairly complicated. There are other factors, a lot of other factors. The other classification issue I run into a lot is employers misclassifying people as salaried. And again, this is done a lot of times because the companies think it will save them money. I don't want to worry about tracking this person's hours. I don't want to worry about paying them overtime. I know they're going to have to work more than 40 hours a week, and I don't want to deal with overtime. I'm going to make everybody salaried. Well, there's a problem with that. Again, the law defines what a salaried person is in terms of their job duties. Their title is not really very relevant. It's really their job duties that matter. And there are very specific exceptions in the law. There's ones for farming, and there's ones for administrative jobs, and there's all kinds of rules. The advantage of having an hourly person is that you can really tell them what their minimum and maximum hours are that they can work. Whereas with a salaried person, you really don't have that ability. They work the hours they need to work to get the work done. You can't really require a minimum. You can't really have a maximum and tell them at this many hours you need to stop working. The advantage of having a salaried person is you don't have to worry about tracking their hours, and then you're not responsible for paying overtime. But again, if they don't comply with the law, the way the law works on this, if you have somebody who's misclassified as salaried, let's say they've been working 45 to 50 hours a week on average, they will automatically get their back overtime pay for 2 to 3 years It's 2 years unless they have evidence that it was a willful violation of the law, and then they get 3 years of overtime, and you are automatically, by statute, obligated to pay their attorney's fees and court costs as well.
Is that classification ruled by federal law or state law or
Both.
So there's different
Yep, that falls under the federal FLSA, which is the Fair Labor Standards Act, as well as the Minnesota FLSA as well. So that's covered under both.
Where are commission employees covered under that? How are they classified?
Well, commission employees, it depends a lot. If they're typically with commission employees, we're looking at sales. And most commission people, a lot of them have a base salary plus commission. So it is routine to have a salesperson be salaried. That's fairly routine. There are certainly salespeople, depending on their duties, that they really can't be salaried. But the majority of salespeople can legitimately be salaried. Then you just have to make sure that you're complying with minimum wage. If they have no base salary, then you may have a minimum wage issue, which a lot of people don't think about, that if it's commission only, they still have to get paid minimum wage. Even if they're salaried, there's a minimum salary that you have to be paid.
If they're commissioned, but they're able to be classified as an independent contractor, then you don't have to worry about it.
If it's legitimately an independent contractor, yes. So don't make this mistake of misclassifying somebody as salaried. If you're not sure, err on the side of making them hourly. But again, if you have questions about that, best to consult a legal professional on this, because the FLSA, the federal one, in print form, the book is about this thick. I mean, it's extremely complex. So, all right, moving on to job descriptions. Things to include in a job description. I see a lot of job descriptions that are terrible, and I think, who drafted this job description? What you want in it are the essential job duties. You want to have additional duties that may be not as essential and not something they're going to do every day, but maybe something that you may ask them to do. So, for example, we had a company, we had a client, and they did some maintenance. They have some employees who do maintenance on the building because they also own the building. Well, the clerical people would not normally be asked to shovel the sidewalk, but there may be times when they are asked. And you want to know that when you hire a person, they're going to be willing to do that when they're asked. So it is important to have additional job duties that might be expected. Minimum qualifications in terms of education, experience, and technical skills. If there's this many years with this particular software, things like that. If you have also preferred qualifications that aren't necessarily required but are preferred, it's important to designate those as preferred and not required. And then you also want to look at ergonomics and work environment considerations. And this sounds kind of dumb, but even in my job descriptions I draft for clerical people, I will say long periods of time sitting at a desk with the ability to move around as needed. That's important. If somebody has a back issue and they can't sit all day, it may not work for them to do a clerical job for you. So even that sounds totally benign, it's important to include that. Obviously, if they're in a manufacturing environment, we have a manufacturing client, they're exposed to all kinds of, they may be exposed to toxic chemicals, they may be in a shop where they have to wear ear protection, etc. We may have employees who work outside and are exposed to the elements, extreme heat, extreme cold, wind, rain, etc. It's important to include all of those things in the job description.
So we always laugh and talk about, and other duties as assigned. Mm-hmm. How far does that go in the court?
And other duties as assigned. I usually don't put that unless it's like an administrative person, where it's kind of like you're not going to think of every possible administrative task. The only way the job description is really going to get challenged in court is if there's a disability issue. So this is really to help you so that you are hiring the right person and evaluating them correctly. It's more for your advantage.
So on the ergonomics question, if you have somebody that, if you have stated that it requires sitting for a long period of time, and you have someone come in that develops back issues, are you liable for their back issues? I mean, does this take away any liability by stating it?
Well, okay, that was a multiple part question.
Most of my questions.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, well, if that's a whole nother, I guess what I could say is accommodating disability issues is a whole nother lecture. So I'm not going to go into that right now. What I would say is that, if you have questions about things like that, you would need to ask. What I would say is, let's say